Once again, I am grateful to be here with you on the eve of the birthday of our great friend to humanity, Mahatma Gandhi. And first off, I'd like to make a note of this quote by Gandhiji. When a man works for an ideal, he becomes irresistible. Now, we know without a doubt the world was made better by Mahatma Gandhi. It seems his incredible influence, his remarkable work, notably his contribution in bringing about the independence of India, epic accomplishment, was in direct contrast to his incredible humility, his loving kindness, his peacefulness. And so it's easy to think, reading this statement of his, that whatever lavish praise, accolades, and credit given to him regarding his life's work and accomplishments, none without great struggle, he unselfishly attributed all to the ideal, not himself. And in so doing, he brought about incredible change. So we remember him with love at this time of his birthday, grateful for his example, and grateful that he incarnated when he did in order to help humanity. So we know there are 4 principles of the Gandhian philosophy that all who may undertake it must be committed to. These tools for change and the betterment of the world: satya, truth and purity in mind, word, and deed; ahimsa, the practice of nonviolence; sarvodaya, action and concern for the welfare of all; and satyagraha, peaceful protest in bringing about change. So today we focus on one aspect of the philosophy behind his major accomplishments, Sarvodaya. Taken from the Hindi language, it has 2 components, and it was Gandhi himself who coined the term. Sarv, which translates to all; Uday, which translates to rising. And so Sarvodaya translates the progress of all, or universal uplift. And here I found online what's considered to be the symbol of Sarvodaya, the red lotus, which one could say symbolizes the culmination of the work of the hand, the work of caring for and nurturing the earth and its people, out of which the sun emerges, shedding light all around in every direction. Sarvodaya. Here's an early photo of Gandhiji. I determined to change my life in accordance with the ideals of the book. So, as the story goes, during the time that Gandhi was working as a lawyer in South Africa, the year 1904, he received a book from a British friend of his by the name of Henry Pollock, a book entitled Unto This Last, which is written by a man named John Ruskin. The book was about the author's own critique of political economy, and it was during this time that Gandhi first read the book during a 24-hour train ride to Durban in South Africa. He was so taken, so inspired by Ruskin's ideas in the book, that not only was he unable to get any sleep during the train ride, but he was also strongly impacted by a feeling of determination, the determination to change his life and align himself with the ideals expressed in the book. And so it was at this time that he made that commitment. Later on, after India's independence, there would be followers of Gandhi who would also embrace this term as the name for their particular efforts in the progress of India toward a continuing and greater self-determination and equality in society. So here we have the foundation of Sarvodaya, the three basic principles. Does that sound vaguely familiar? Not exactly the same as our three fundamentals of theosophy in the Secret Doctrine, but this student found it interesting that structurally the triad forms the foundation of the philosophy. And one could certainly say that these three ideas certainly echo our three fundamentals to some degree. So first, the good of the individual is contained in the good of all. Second, the work of a lawyer has the same value as that of a barber, in that everyone has the right to a livelihood that is the result of whatever work they do. Third, the life of a worker, a life of skill and craftsmanship, is a life worth living. So Gandhi stated that the first of these he was aware of, the second he was only barely aware of, and the third had never even occurred to him. But he said he knew that the second and the third were contained in the first. And he wanted to put these three basic ideas into practice. Another quote from Gandhiji: "There is sufficiency in the world for man's need, but not for man's greed." So I'll share with you here some ideas about Gandhi's philosophy of Sarvodaya found in an article written by Dr. Shubhangi Rathi. Gandhi had a twofold idea for what he considered to be the making of a worthy life. One, utter simplicity in living. Two, high thinking, the moral, embedded in and motivating our actions in the physical world. This dream of Gandhi's Sarvodaya society was that all could be free from greed, from the endless acquisition of material wealth, more and more luxurious living, while engaged in high thinking. I'm reminded here of the spiritual practice spoken of in Tsongkhapa's great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment, the spiritual practice of contentment, which seems to put the brakes on the too easily conditioned habit of looking outward for happiness, thinking that material things will make us happy. How many in our present society get caught up in the belief that endless purchasing is what will make us happy, that somehow the answer to everything is to buy something, to buy more and more things. So in Gandhi's Sarvodaya society, there would be no issue of unemployment. Everyone would have ample opportunity to earn through honest work and afforded a decent life of dignity. Yes, there clearly would be differences, income depending on the variables, education, profession, etc. But his idea, remarkably idealistic, was that those who did earn more would use their greater earnings for the good of all, for the sake of society, and land and wealth would become common property to be used for the welfare of all. And because this Sarvodaya society would be centered in a life of service, anyone who has more than the general proportion of all would then become a trustee, and it would be their job to see to it that the larger amount of wealth would be managed and used for the benefit of those less fortunate in society. He was truly an agent for the good and betterment for his time, in the sense that at the time of Gandhi's influence, we know there were few machines, certainly comparatively speaking, and few connected to work as they are today. He truly believed in the dignity of physical work, that machines should not ever replace man's sacred connection to the earth through physical labor. And he felt very much that, like Leo Tolstoy, the Russian writer and thinker, regardless of any of the various kinds of labor, everybody should be engaged to some degree in the dignity of physical labor in some form. Maybe it was his idea that in this way, man's overall uh, development and evolution would be less stymied or, say, sacrificed one aspect for another, because the physical self would also be engaged in the physical for the sake of all, fulfilling and expressing each person's particular abilities, but from a moral viewpoint and intention. Gandhi's dream was that the philosophy, the model of Sarvodaya, could first take root among his closest circle. That would be in the ashrams, and then spread to the villages where the philosophy and action would transform the people and their idea of themselves as equal participators in the welfare of all, that it would then inspire India to do the same, and finally, the world, united in consciousness and in action. I am always reminded of Mr. Judge's quote, acting for and as the self of all. So here are some objectives of the Sarvodaya movement. An established network of self-supporting village communities, the practice of seeing all as family, blood extended to cover the whole village, race, caste, language, completely eliminated. I'd stop and say here, also referring to Tsongkhapa's great treatise on the stages in the path to enlightenment, there is definitely a spiritual practice that is put forth that allows the aspirant to cultivate compassion and love through this practice of seeing everyone, saying that everyone for eons of time has at one point or another been a parent, a mother. And so in cultivating this feeling of love and compassion, to generate that repeatedly strengthens this quality inside, and it fosters the desire to give back to the parent what has been given. So this seems to be in these spiritual circles a very specific practice that brings the aspirant closer to that universal compassion. Going on, so completely eliminated, agriculture planned so that everyone has enough to eat. Industry planned, constructed so that all are employed. The people of the community determine their own particular needs through a council that represents each community. Here are a few more of the principles. There would be no central authority, but there would be a political and economic atmosphere in the villages. So this student is thinking it would be generated through the councils just mentioned that represents each of the communities. Reading through each of the items, this student found the decided intention to remove or lessen as much as possible what we could say are the tools for selfish ambition and lust for power, and replace that energy, that force, with the concern for all. And I'm reminded here in the Aquarian Almanac that Jonathan so graciously let us have. There's a quote from Hermes. Gandhi demonstrated and taught the possibility of noetic force, using psychic force on behalf of human brotherhood and universal welfare. So I thought that was really cool. Just a couple more. The profit motive, next to the last, will disappear. No private property, an instrument of exploitation, it would be considered to be. The source of social distinctions and hatred. Sarvodaya stands for the progress of all. So once again, this effort to eliminate whatever would foster this separation and division and potential hatred. Okay, let me read for you. This is from Jonathan's article entitled Gandhi as a Symbol of Truth. One of the barriers to our ability to live up to our principles, Gandhi proclaimed, is confusion about the ends and the means. The ideal should always be the end in view, but what about the road we take to realize the ideal? This road is the way, our means that we employ to achieve our ends. For Gandhi, the fundamental ideal to strive for is sat, truth, while ahimsa, nonviolence, is the archetypic and prototypic means to not only arrive at truth, but to also express it. Ahimsa, in its many variations and expressions, points like a perfect symbol, he says, with direct fidelity to truth. So it would seem that Gandhi's estimation, if we could anchor these virtues manifesting a society that collectively functions on behalf of all, then the collective, and not just the privileged few, this would be a natural progression, given that we have cultivated these virtues inside. So to return to Dr. Rathi's article on Gandhi's Sarvodaya, we know it's probably quite true that whatever arises in a man or woman's heart, that is the place he or she will act from or will strive to act from. And in his article, Dr. Rathi's final take on the matter is that the ideals of Sarvodaya are not practicable. Even though the ideals of Sarvodaya may be noble, we know they are. As he says, quote, Sarvodaya doctrines are soaring, and it is doubtful whether they can rest on the earth. I don't know if I agree with that. But he concludes with a somewhat disappointing tone about his mother country, India, saying that in order for Sarvodaya to really succeed, it cannot be just one poor country that takes up the mantle, and that it is difficult to bring about change with the young because they are given to such selfishness. Now, why he chose to leave the older population out of this description, this student doesn't know. I'm not sure, but it's not lost on me that only a few days ago, I read that Jeff Bezos was toppled on a list of richest billionaires by an Indian man. So it's a safe bet and understandable, given the times that we're in, that this man would not be quite ready to turn over all his wealth to the masses. But the question is, given that we know the times we're in, does this glaring truth mean that we should give up on the ideal? It would be safe to say that a few of us are in a state, that few of us, are in a state of perfect selflessness. Maybe I should just speak for myself here. Trying, learning, applying best we can with whatever karmic mix we have. Let's see. So Gandhiji left behind the vivid memory of his life as an example for the ideal of Sarvodaya, but he also left behind followers who believed in the philosophy as well, and they took up the mantle each in their own way and with much success. no, not yet. So here we have the Sarvodaya Shramadana movement. The term Shramadana means the gift of labor. And it's meant in the sense that offering service and help is a gift. And this was the kind of feeling that was wanted and expected from all who would volunteer. And so it must be true that the spirit in which we give and engage in service can also be an added gift to the receiver as well. So in 1958, a young teacher by the name of Dr. A.T. Ariyaratne, got it. He led 40 high school kids and 12 teachers on an educational experiment to an outcast village to help fix up their village. The village of Rodea, inhabited by beggars and outcasts, received their help. They renovated houses, they dug wells, they created latrines, they established community gardens, they gave educational programs and self-employment help. It was very successful, and the success of this experiment was then repeated in other villages, and it led to what is now considered to be the largest organization in Sri Lanka, the Sarvodaya Shramadana movement. Led by Dr. Ariyaratne, they carved out what they considered to be 10 basic needs for the purpose of the transformation of the villages: clean environment, water supply, clothing, nutrition or nutritious food, shelter, healthcare, communication, energy, fuel and lighting, education, access, and cultural and spiritual activities. Once, through service, the villagers were raised up and transformed through all of these offerings, given a new and better idea of themselves, having the basics of life handled. There were 5 more steps that needed to come about that would then enable them to connect with the world on a footing that they too could now be of service. And this brought to mind the quote that we put in the flyer. There are people in the world so hungry that God cannot appear to them except in the form of bread. And so here was the magic. Once they got the basic tools of transformation of everyday life handled, up and running, then they needed these 5 steps for them to now be able to connect with the world. And these are the mighty 5. Psychological infrastructure. I wonder if the student understands it as well as I would like, but it seems to be speaking of a structure so that a person who has been moved upward, who has a new view of life for himself, gets to now have help with the psychology of that, of what it means to be where he is now, what his possibilities are, and how he connects with life in a way that before he or she was not able to. Social and educational, again, some of the same in what I just said, in the sense that a new idea and a new way of operating within the community and getting ideas about it, being educated on having this new level of life. Very important. Basic human needs, who knows? It could be anything from a pregnant woman and how to understand her process. Those basic human needs. Then income, job creation, and self-sufficiency. it's an interesting idea that as these changes are brought about, there is a psychological adjustment that has to be made. And it's a tremendous amount of love and compassion in this effort to help people. Not only, it's like, okay, you've got a leg up, goodbye. But now that you're here, let's think about these ideas and sharing it with the neighboring villages. And in the first 10 that I listed, the very last was cultural and spiritual. And I thought this was wonderful, and I certainly titled it Theosophy in Action. In addition to all this wonderful change for the villages, public forums where Buddhists, Hindus, Muslims, and Christians would all meditate together. That sounds like theosophy to me. As of now, there are more than 15,000 villages that are staffed by Sarvodaya people. And at this point, approximately 11 million citizens now benefit from these programs. So we need not, because of the Kali Yuga, be downhearted, because Gandhi's dream is alive. Namaste. Yes, okay. The 4 yugas. I didn't mean to stop here, but we know the Satya, the Treta, Dvapara, Kali is where we are. We are in the Kali Yuga. Now, what did Lord Krishna say about the Kali Yuga? In Kali Yuga, pious men and saints will be like the cuckoo. They will all have sweet words, but they will exploit and inflict pain on their followers, like the cuckoo was doing to the poor rabbit. So that gives us a pretty clear indication of the context in which we are trying to do good. But these 3 things, this student has heard repeatedly over the years in theosophical classes, and it has always stayed with me and gives me a sense of hope. 1, that the masters know the divisions of time. So whatever they release to us or allow us to take part in or learn, it's in accordance with law. 2, a small amount of good in Kali Yuga can go a long way. I've heard that so many times. 3, it is possible, even in the midst of dark cycles in the Kali Yuga, to have a golden age. So all is not lost. But now I believe that Jonathan is going to speak about an aspect of Gandhi's community efforts called the constructive program. Yes?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So I'm stopped sharing for the moment. Is that how I roll? Okay.
So, all right. So I am going to share my screen now. And that's the, just a second here. Wait. There you go. And I'm going to play. Okay, do you see my screen? It says Sarvodaya and so forth?
Yes.
Okay, so that's the flyer. And I just wanted to bring to your attention just a few quotes in the Aquarian Almanac for this week. Monica already brought some important ones to the fore here. Actually, oh, Tsongkhapa, all actions become significant. Remember how where
Yes.
Martha ended her presentation saying that a little bit can do a long way? So that's the one I was looking for there.
Beautiful.
So wait, let me try and do it. I think I got this theory that says that much of what Gandhi was working with in his life and a lot of the magic comes from the key to theosophy and the four golden, and also in other sections in the key to theosophy about what HPB says about duty. It says that, and then I also think that the DNA for the key to theosophy is really in the great master's letter, the Mahachohan. So you have the seed within the seed within the seed. And the Mahachohan says in 1881, in that letter that was dictated and then transmitted, it is not the individual and determined purpose of attaining oneself, nirvana, the culmination of all knowledge and absolute wisdom, which is, after all, only an exalted and glorious selfishness, but the self-sacrificing pursuit of the best means to lead on the right path our neighbor, to cause as many of our fellow creatures as we possibly can to benefit by it, which constitutes the true theosophist. That's reminiscent of Monica's slide, where that was that slide on leadership. A true leader isn't determined by their how many followers they have, but instead how many leaders they produce, something like that.
Yes.
And also the Mahachohan says, all of us have to get rid of our own ego, the illusory apparent self, to recognize our true self in a transcendental divine life. A letter which is also from the same letter. Now, I think that Gandhian trusteeship, as exemplified in the constructive program, is not only a constructive program in social life and in village building and community, but also in everyday life. Because I will get into that later about trusteeship and how it involves meaningful action for the whole, for the uplift of the whole. And that's a method, a work plan of getting rid of the ego. Because in serving others and uplifting the whole, one forgets about the ego. So then the Mahachohan says, to achieve the proposed objects, a greater, wiser, and especially a more benevolent intermingling of the high and the low, of the alpha and the omega of society was determined upon. So the society is not meant to be an academic thing. It's not meant to be, like a club for doing magic tricks, or even some kind of a closed off institution for occultism. It's really supposed to be a mingling of the so-called high and the low, the alpha and the omega of society. Now, this next sentence is where the great master gets into the really hardcore nitty-gritty and doesn't mince words. The white race must be the first to stretch out the hand of fellowship to the dark nations. To call the poor, despised, so-called nigger, brother. This prospect may not smile to all. He is no theosophist who objects to this principle. Now, this, as I've said, seems to be the fundamental vibration upon which the key to is delivered. And it is essentially portrayed in how HPB handles the question of what duty is. Theosophy ultimately is a call to action. Yes, it's an incredible metaphysical infrastructure. It's the rational explanation of things. It's incredibly inspiring. But as HPV says, if you don't put it into action, it's not doing you any good. She writes, duty is that which is due to humanity. That's an interesting thing. What is my duty? That was the question of Arjuna, right? HPV says it's that which is due to humanity, to our fellow men, neighbors, family, and especially that which we owe to all those who are poorer and more helpless than we are ourselves. Remember when Monica was talking about that Tsongkhapa idea that all of our brothers and sisters at one point were our mother, and we all have a debt to our mother, don't we? So this is the idea we owe something to those who are poorer and more helpless than we are ourselves. This is a debt which, if left unpaid during life, leaves us spiritually insolvent and moral bankrupts in our next incarnation. So therefore, theosophy becomes the quintessence of duty. So then the inquirer in the key says, well, what do you consider as due to humanity at large? Theosophist, full recognition of equal rights and privileges for all, and without distinction of race, color, social position, or birth. Then it gets a little more nitty-gritty. When would you consider such due not given? HPV says, well, when there is the slightest invasion of another's right, be that other a man or a nation, when there's any failure to show him the same justice, kindness, consideration, or mercy, which we desire for ourselves. It's the golden rule. The whole present system of politics is built on the oblivion of such rights and the most fierce assertion of national selfishness. She does not mince words. I thought I would just go through a few slides on from the writings of Raghavan Iyer on trusteeship and the constructive program. And the constructive program is all about, let me just say this, the constructive program, there's passive resistance, which is very powerful. And that's a big part of how Gandhi was able to create the world's largest democracy. And speaking of the world's largest democracy, as Monica said, India has now the richest man, but it's becoming more and more known that India has the largest population, by the way. It has exceeded China. Not that that's good or bad, it's just what's happened. And in that largest country now, we have the world's largest democracy. So some people say, well, there's such thing as paying too much attention to Gandhi. How did he pull this off? It was through the sheer power of humility and nonviolence. And he had the logical, obvious point of view that at the time,
You froze.
control three. Well, now it's 1.4 billion. And the way that the masses were able to regain the control of their own country was in the power of nonviolent resistance, but also through Gandhi's constructive program. And that has to do with the spinning wheel, is one example. But there are many elements to the constructive program, which has to do with nurturing communal unity, abolishing untouchability, fostering adult education, systematic improvement of villages, Monica spoke to that, uplifting the peasants, developing nonviolent labor unions, working towards economic and social equality, and promoting cottage and small scale industries as a means of decentralizing economic production and distribution. So the nonviolent resistance, you could say, is the power of a negative action. I won't participate, right? And that's very powerful. But the constructive program is the positive energy, you could say, of building and affirming human potential and growth. Now, the whole idea of the construction of the constructive program is based on trusteeship. And there's an article on Theosophy Trust website from Hermes called Trusteeship in Practice, the Art of Renunciation. And so these few points are from that article. Here are some of the ways that Gandhi approached the concept of trusteeship. One is that trusteeship encourages owners to see themselves as vigilant trustees of their accumulated wealth for the larger community without threatening them. So it's a posture that those with material resources can adopt. And they don't have to feel guilty. They don't have to have an ego trip. They can just say, okay, I guess I'm a trustee. And remember this, the Mahatma idea that the whole thing has to do with getting rid of the ego. So this is like a way out, okay, of the ego trap of ownership of any resource, to see oneself as a humble, vigilant trustee. Then there's another way for workers to look at things, because you have the haves and the have-nots. So what is a philosophical way that a worker can think in terms of trusteeship? Workers, instead of regarding themselves as enemies of the rich, or regarding the rich as their natural enemies, should hold their labor in trust for those who are in need of it. So one's labor, one's creative labor, is a resource to them. This they can do only when, instead of feeling so utterly helpless as they do, they realize their importance in human economy and shed their fear or distrust of the rich. So by realizing the value of labor, the value of work, they feel like they've got something, and that they're not totally hopeless and helpless. And obviously, he's encouraging unionization in certain contexts. The idea of trusteeship could be put into practice nonviolently because it could be instituted by degrees. So it's a revolution in slow motion, which is the most sustainable kind. Social conditions are ripe for imaginative applications of the principle of trusteeship. Why? Because of the collapse of Western imperialism. It's also because all these things are becoming transparent. We could say in the Aquarian age, all of these isms are collapsing, and they're becoming, the emperor has no clothes, people are figuring out. So the emperor of Western imperialism is becoming too obvious. Everybody knows what's going on. And same thing with fascism and totalitarianism. Who knows what's going to happen with China, for example? The psychological failure of capitalism. That's a whole thing going on. People don't even want to show up to work, right? The moral bankruptcy of state socialism, and just the corruption of too much government. And let me see if I can do something here. I'm having trouble with, let's see here. I can't read the bottom one. Can somebody read the bottom one?
I can, I think. Number 4, is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, and the bottom one, okay. Or if there's anything below the moral bankruptcy of socialism.
The ideological inflexibility of communism.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So Anything else but down there? I'm having technical issues.
I don't see anything beyond that. No.
All right. So basically, the time to kind of rethink things in terms of trusteeship and the constructive program is possibly becoming more and more ripe as the Aquarian age unfolds. So yes, we're in the Kali Yuga, but there's also this idea of kind of an opposite and countervailing seed and small plant that is starting to grow. As Monica pointed out, you can do a lot of good, and you can actually create a mini golden age within the Kali Yuga. Now, so what is a Gandhian trustee? And again, I got this from these articles from Raghavan Iyer in Hermes. And so I just put to bullet points a few of the paragraphs, and I kind of sifted and kind of made kind of a bullet point list here. What is a Gandhian trustee at heart? A Gandhian trustee is a person who self-consciously assumes responsibility for upholding, protecting, and putting to good use whatever he possesses, acquires, or earns. So that could be money, that could be real estate, that could be your vehicle, that could be your library, that could be your secret doctrine, that could be your book of poetry, that could be your Bhagavad Gita, or it could be inner qualities that you've developed, or it could be certain skills that you've developed in the workplace. There's a certain apprenticeship program that goes on in every kind of a career, right? And eventually they become journeyman level at some point, and they become very proficient. Well, that's all of these kind of resources, inner and outer, can become put to good use and for the service of humanity. A trustee is self-governing and morally sensitive. So a trustee is awake to what's going on around him or her. How can what do I have? What kind of resources might I have to offer in this context? A trustee is committed to abstaining from all exploitative attitudes and relationships. So a real trustee is a person who does self-study and says, am I in some kind of a, not just an exploitative relationship for myself, am I being exploited? But wait a minute, am I exploiting somebody else? A Gandhian trustee strives to become self-regulating, reliable, and sacrificial. So such a person isn't a person that just says, well, what's mine is yours, and so therefore what's yours is mine, or so therefore I don't have to get any place on time. Therefore I don't have to sacrifice because I have this wonderful attitude on life. The person all the more, just as a person, remember the thing in Light in the Path that says that a person, even though that they are not, they work as those who are ambitious. So there's a certain sacrifice to ambition, right? But this is the same thing as if one is not ambitious for oneself. One learns to think and feel altruistically. It's a whole training of the instruments and paying attention to one's feelings. And it's not just thinking altruistically, it's a feeling of altruism. Constantly, 24/7, 365. A person that is a real trustee has a sense of when, where, and how to use what he has, even if he has but little. And in so doing, increasing its potential for good. Much like the parable of the talents. Remember when the person was able to reinvest wisely and therefore have 100-fold or something like that. But that it goes not just with capitalism and ambition, but once again, it's in terms of the more you have, the more that shall be given. in that sense of trusteeship. It's even more true. If it's true in a capitalism context, it's even more true in a trusteeship context. Here's an interesting quote that Gandhi had, where he had a talk with socialists. He was speaking to a large group of socialists. No doubt the transfer of power will remove many obstacles, but we shall have to do solid work among the people. Since you look upon me as an advisor and seek my advice of your own free will, I have only one advice to give, and that is that if you wish to establish socialism, there's only one way in which it can be done. Go and live among the poor in the villages, live as they live, become one with the village people, work for 8 hours daily. Use only village-made goods and articles, even in your personal life. Remove illiteracy among the village people. Eradicate untouchability and uplift the women. So it's not just something that you talk about. It involves sacrifice. And some people say, well, sacrifice is not fair. But that's the whole thing. Sacrifice isn't fair. It's unconditional giving. So here's some things that we can do to work on to become authentic trustees. We can think about what non-possession really is. It's a very deep subject. You could have a whole Aquarian series presentation on non-possession. It presupposes a change of heart, not merely a change of intellectual viewpoint. One sees his abilities and possessions as belonging to God, mankind, or to future generations. So that everything one has, a person is not appropriating and saying, oh, that's mine, because it never really was one's in the first place. That's part of the metaphysics of all this. Everything one has belongs to God, mankind, or to future generations. Don't we think about that in relation to theosophy? It's not really ours per se. It really belongs to mankind. And we try to uphold it and pass on the torch for future generations. There's also the idea of the simplification of wants. If we want to make the most deliberate and compassionate use of our individual talents, gifts, faculties, and skills, then we need to simplify our desires and our wants. That's reminiscent of that Judge article, Meditation, Concentration, Will. If you wish to develop the will, you have to simplify one's desires. The art of silence. A benign and intelligent silence is the precursor of effective beneficial action. It aids mind control and augments true wealth. Remember when Arjuna is called the conqueror of wealth by Krishna? One wonders what kind of wealth is being conquered. But it has to do with the wealth of being able to participate and instantiate beneficial action and the art of silence. And then finally, the ability to put trust in others. We often fail to confer equal trust on others or fail to share responsibilities with others because we will not distance ourselves from our suspicions and mental images of them. So in other words, we don't trust people. You have to trust people. So if a person is going to really be a trustee of something, a person needs to be able to pass it on and pass on that responsibility of trusteeship to others. So I'm going to do stop share. Yeah, I think that's the last of my slides here. Wow. Okay, not much time, but we knew it would be this way, right, Monica? So
yes, it's a lot, and it's hard to know what to leave out. So where'd you go? Oh, there you are.
yeah, I'm here somewhere. Yeah, we can take questions. Judy?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you both for wonderful, clear, illuminating presentations on Mahatma Gandhi. And I'm very much a believer in Gandhi's ideals. However, this is, I guess, the one criticism, which it's even in the film Gandhi. He was asked, could you have stopped the Nazis with Sarvodaya? And he said, no, not without defeat, because the British, as imperialistic and cruel as they were, had enough among them, even Lord Mountbatten, who realized that it was absolutely wrong to oppress the population of India the way they had, and that there were many people in the British labor movement who supported Gandhi. Churchill was thrown out as prime minister when he said India was the jewel in the crown of the British Empire and wanted to keep it. So how do we deal with people who are so violent? I mean, I guess we can think of the current dictator of Russia. Could the Ukrainians stop him simply by nonviolent resistance? I don't think so. I mean, they've had to put their foot down and say, no, you're not going to take our country and culture, even though boundaries of a national sort are very bad. And I totally agree with that. And Russia and the Ukrainian people are very much alike. So what do we do with people who have gone so far as to be Nazis? Can we stop them with nonviolence?
Monica?
I think that there is something that can be done with nonviolence. I think the intuitive hit I get is I'm reminded of this big, burly Black man who took it upon himself to take as friends or would-be friends two horrendous guys from the KKK and talk with them over a period of time. And the compassion that he embodied was so strong that they not only gave up being a member of the Ku Klux Klan, but they, as an act of commitment, let's say, gave the man their KKK uniforms in saying, oh, we're giving this up. So there was something that transpired that was transmitted through this gentle Black man that certainly the Gandhi tenets, let's say, I would think embodied to some degree. The first being nonviolence. I mean, that you can sit and talk with somebody in such an remarkably logical way about that. And if you are living that nonviolence, it's a safe bet that that force or that Shakti or that chi, or however you would like to express it, would definitely be transmitted. Because it's just this student's idea that anyone who is involved in an active hatred of any kind is looking for love. So it's, what's the inroad to that person? This particular Black man had an inroad. And my take on it is that it was just his higher self, being the gentle person he was used as a channel. So yes, to a certain degree. But if a person is intent on violence and tearing down life, that's their pitiful effort at love. It's a horrible thing to say, but that's their, and so then other measures have to be taken. So I guess what I'm saying is to a degree.
Is that Daryl Davis that you're talking about?
I think that's his name.
Yeah, so he's a blues musician. It says blues musician Daryl Davis has made it his mission to talk to the KKK. Something like that. But anyway, I don't know.
Yes, I think that's his name. But it was a mind blower to hear him talk, and they just They surrendered to themselves. It's not that they surrendered to him.
Yeah. Wow.
Good example.
Helena, do you have something on this question?
Yeah, I was thinking in terms of evolution. So when we get a character, I shouldn't call it character, but when we get someone who's on the way to a depth ship, even say, when we get a great being who incarnates, I think one of the things that happens is they quicken the evolutionary process on some level. So you get a Gandhi, or you get a Martin Luther King, or you get, a figure who is able to look at, that whole concept that John was talking about in the Mahatma letters, a nigger, because I remember in my yearbook, one of the women in my class put, women is the nigger of the world. And I thought, oh my God, where did that come from? So there are all these different types of groups of people that we really are ignorant about, and then you get someone who addresses the fear, part of it. And the interaction, instead of coming from a lower plane, right, comes from a higher plane, from music, from art, from studying theosophy, from helping them get jobs or situated or whatever, like Gandhi addresses the service of those people, like Aaron Judge, who the Yankees won, but he didn't hit that home run to break his record. I mean, and on some level, acts like that also count, right? Because it constructively, you see a pattern, right? And then the evolution of, a group of people, gets challenged, and then the discussion gets elevated, and the interactions come from a higher place, right? And then you see facilitating evolution and growth, kind of like what Jonathan does for me, right, Jonathan? And all of us with having the series, we're all trying to bring out the best in each other, instead of the worst. We're coming, we're supporting our collective evolutionary process. And it looks messy sometimes, but maybe we can clear it up, and bring it to a higher level, not to the extent that these great beings can be, but we can work locally, right?
Marlon, do you have a point along these lines or a question?
Well, I'm not sure if it's right along these lines, but can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. But I just wanted to make a few observations. First, to say to both of you, thank you so very much. The presents, you two always give such really good presentations, so thank you. But then I'd like to point out that the originator of Patagonia has given his business away, not to get a tax break because he's still paying taxes on it, but to help the earth and the people on the earth. So he gave it away to this organization, which now has that as its purpose, to help the people to help Earth and the people on the earth. Another thing is, I live in the valley by Celaya near Fresno, and the Mexican American population here is pretty large. And I have to say, it is really beautiful to see how they work. To see, it is an example of what you were talking about, Jonathan. Their families are closely structured. They love their work. It's like, if I may, Monica, it's like watching the Warriors play basketball. They love it. They're almost laughing all the time. You talk of prana. The prana energy is about them. It is so beautiful to see and so humble. Another thing I'd like to point out, and I'm hoping you can talk to all of these, and perhaps Jeff on this one. When I was in Japan, it was amazing to see the relationship between the administrators of a business and the laborers. The pay was very close. The salary was very closely structured. The difference was that a laborer would use a certain kind of respect language to talk to the administrator. And the administrator would incorporate and listen to the laborers on the line to see if their ideas were any good. The administrator's ideas were any good. What do you have to say from your perspective? They were included. The unemployment was very low. People were working at jobs, for example, the person on the elevator or the greeter at the store. They would be happy as can be. This I consider to be a function of the what we would say in Africa is being raised by the community. You were part of the community, and that sense of being part of the community in Japan was very strong. Japan has some problems, sure, as do all countries, but that was unbelievable to see working on a grand scale, this relationship. And there was something else, but I think I've talked too long. Could speak to
I don't think we really have time to do a whole discussion at this point, but I'd like to do, Laura, could you ask your question or make a comment? Because
well, I thank you very much, Monica and Jonathan. We think that maybe if we had shown more compassion at the fall of the Soviet Union and the fall of communism, if we had recognized and admitted the failures of capitalism at the time and approached them with a feeling of brotherhood and compassion, and not so much assaulted their pride, we would not be in the situation we are now. That the reason Putin has so much support around him is because they feel hurt at the loss of that. And if we had applied Gandhian ideas at the right time in the right way, we might have been able to prevent where we are today.
Hear, hear. Thank you for that comment. I think that the whole thing about dictators and so forth, people that just, it all has to do with timing and doing the right heart quality at the right time. And yes, you can say that things can devolve and get worse and worse and worse, and then you have to use guns or whatever to deal with it, whatever. But with the right kind of brotherhood at the right time, there's a lot to be said for that. So, Miluka?
Yes, I'm sorry. I put it on the, I posted, but it's more or less, it have to do with that the masters were in this village. Yep. And in the Himalayan, and they were being attacked by some bandits, and they just stood up in front of them, line up, and have no weapons, nothing. And then as the bandits were approaching, they would start falling off the horses, and the horses start turning back. And it was a scientist that wrote this book called The Master from the Far East. And he said, he asked them, how come that happened? What did you do? You had no weapon, you didn't say anything, you didn't talk. And he said, because we send a wave of love. If they were open to love, they would have benefited from it. But since they were angry and with this negative energy, it just bounced back to them. In other words, which is the same principle that they use, the monks they use, and where the martial arts come from. They never use their energy to attack anybody. They use the opponent energy and throw it, Yeah. Just go with your energy, and they got hurt that way.
Yes.
Just a comment. And congratulations, was a wonderful talk.
That's the power of energy, that's for sure. There is a comment that I think circles back around to Laura's point. And this is from Robert Moore. You have a chance of treating cancer if you treat it early on, right? Early stage 1, right? Once it has metastasized, it will be difficult. This goes to timing, right? Same holds true with political disease. But since nations act selfishly, diseases spread until violence erupts. So timing, once again, and vigilance. Was anybody, Monica, do you have any last comments? I have one last thing that I could say, but why don't you, do you have anything that you'd like to leave us with?
Well, let me just say these few words that I have here. Excuse me. I wrote it. It would seem that the altruism spoken of by HPB, saying clearly that this is what theosophy actually is more needed in this time. And that being willing to help others who are suffering in so many ways, who do not have the understanding that is available to us, which is a healing balm within itself, is much needed in these times. And so it's still right to embrace Sarvodaya in our hearts, as Mr. Judge says, acting for and as the self of all. And we can manifest that idea and that statement probably in more ways than we realize. So that's basically fighting for those who are unable to fight for themselves is still the way to go.
Defending the defenseless. Thank you, Monica. I'd like to just read something from Gandhi, and it's on the wall here in the lodge in San Diego. I can't see. Yeah, there it is. Okay. Yeah, Ken, let me know if trying to pull things off. Here we go. No, I'm gonna more like that. Okay, I'm gonna read you this thing. It's a talisman that Gandhi says. He says, I will give you a talisman. Whenever you are in doubt or the self becomes too much with you, apply the following tests. Recall the face of the poorest and weakest man whom you may have seen and ask yourself if the step you contemplate is going to be of any use to him. Will he gain anything by it? Will it restore him to a control over his own life and destiny? In other words, will it lead to Swaraj for the hungry and spiritually starving millions? Then you will find your doubts and yourself melting away. Thank you, Monica. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Jonathan.